everyone, my name is Felina and welcome to my Read and Discuss with Me segment where we talk about books. Today, let's talk about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but beware of spoilers because since it's an analysis, I assume that you've already read the book. I make these videos at least once a month, but you can request a video and I'll make it as soon as possible. This video is going to be split into several parts. First, let's talk about the author, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and some of the historical context bits, and then let's talk about the actual summary and analysis all in one because today I'm doing it part by part. I hope you enjoy the video. Let's start. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, born 1772, was one of the key figures of the British Romantic movement. Together with William Wordsworth in 1798, they published Lyrical Ballads, a collection of poems that is widely considered to be the start of the British Romantic movement. From a young age, Samuel Taylor Coleridge was already a prodigious reader. He read a lot of romances and Eastern tales. In 1791, he entered Jesus College at Cambridge, but due to financial difficulties during his third year, he dropped out. Because of his brothers, he was restored, but it was a difficult time to return because of the turmoil of the French Revolution. It set into motion a whole number of discussions about ideology because the revolution was supposed to be all about, well, liberty, equality, and fraternity. It sparked some controversial responses, mostly because of the terror was going against the ideals of the revolution. Around the start of 1798, Coleridge started to go deeper into political issues because of the French revolutionary government suppressing the Switzerland state. During that time, he wrote France, an ode, which I really recommend because the way that the language portrays emotion is just... But let's backtrack a little bit. In 1794, Coleridge met Robert Southey on a train and the two shared their political ideas, their philosophical ideas, and they decided to start a pantisocracy, you know, as one casually does with a stranger they meet on the train. Basically, what they wanted to do was they wanted to go to the New World, aka America, with a couple other families and set up a commune at Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. It was an idea of an equal government run by all, so that's why they needed several families. Then Southey married and he urged Coleridge to marry as well, so Coleridge did, but he wasn't really in love with his wife and he had a difficult time, and it kind of gave him an existential crisis because Southey started to back up from the pantisocracy idea, and well, Coleridge needed a means to support his family because, well, he was kind of struggling between what he wanted to do intellectually and the fact that, well, he had a family that he needed to support. But then in 1795 he meets William Wordsworth and the two work through their mental issues together and they write lyrical ballads, mental issues. So there are a lot of people who agree that the greats such as Coleridge, Shelley, Byron, Schumann, they had bipolar disorder. What effect did it have on their artistic creativity? Well, to be honest, I don't know, but I want to find out. So there's a book that I heard a lot of people recommend that it's a good book. It's called Touched by Fire by Jameson. I already bought it, so I'm super excited to read it. Coleridge had a difficult time before his death. He did manage to redeem himself a little with his lectures about Shakespeare. Unlike Voltaire and his army of French people that hated Shakespeare, Coleridge really found him fascinating. He gave a series of lectures that I'm pretty sure you can buy somewhere. He had a difficult time. He got involved with drugs like opium. He got involved with alcohol. His financial benefactors stopped giving. He fell out with the Wordsworth. It was a difficult period for him. But let's return to the period where he was friends with Wordsworth. It was truly a creative period for them both. A period where he created a lot of things, where he was very emotional, where he produced some of his best work. The Prelude was Wordsworth's letter to Coleridge, and Biographia, literaria, some argue, was his response. Another book I have yet to read is His Brother's Keeper by Weisman. Just as a summary, I've read that Weisman discusses the idea that perhaps Coleridge was actually homosexual and that's why he had such strong feelings for Wordsworth. That's why they both impacted them. Of course, it's really hard to say whether they were just friends and it was like a homosocial type of relationship as Weisman describes it. Recently, there's also been some analysis into whether or not Christabel, Coleridge's other work, was all about suppressing sexuality and same-sex desires. That's it for the author's biography, and let's talk a little bit about the historical context. So this section is brief, it's just a quick introduction, a quick gloss over some romantic ideas because, well, the poem isn't really set anywhere in particular. The sea is timeless, but it does expand on some of the famous romantic ideas such as exploration, and like wilderness and the sea. This period moved away from materialistic vision into this desire to reconnect with nature, into imagination. It was a period where it was all about emotions and feelings, and Wordsworth said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, conscious thoughts and dreams and all of that. How we talked about Coleridge maybe being homosexual. This is why that some people, when they analyze it, they think that was a reference to specifically that, because it was all about unconscious thoughts and the period in general. Romanticism was all about self-expression, and it had a lot of references to nature. Check out my video on Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, another major writer of the period. I'll put it in the cards somewhere. The mariner is described as this old man with glittering eyes and bony hands, and he's top with one of three. So there are guests going to a wedding, and he takes the wedding guest, and the wedding guest cannot choose but hear. He has to obey the mariner's will. It's all about this hypnotic power that the mariner has. It's compelling the way that he makes the wedding guest listen. And eyes have always had a big meaning in our culture, in our everyday life, and there's this focus specifically on the eyes. So we say that the eyes are like the mirror of the soul, and it's attributed to Shakespeare, but it was first said by Cicero, who was 106 to 43 BC, who is quoted as saying, excuse my beginner classical Latin, ut imago est animi voltus sic indices oculi. So the face is a picture of the mind, as the eyes are the interpreter. We can start to think about what is the mariner's soul, but we'll expand on that a little bit later. And so the wedding guest starts his story. He says that the sun came up upon the left. He starts with the ship sailing, well, south. As he's telling all this, because the wedding guest is so eager to get back to the wedding, even though we as the readers can sense that the mariner is like this crazy old man who just pulled out the wedding guest, we can sense that he has a story to tell. We are listening, we are interested, and so it's this battle of everyday life and of something important. As the ship is sailing, it encounters a huge storm and is blown to the land of ice. And now there came both dust and snow, and it feels wondrous cold. An ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. It's a dismal sort of place, even though it also has this kind of beauty, and it elicits wonder, but not shapes of men nor beasts we can. The ice was all between. Even though it's this ice nature that's majestic to behold, it's still a lonesome and dangerous period. It plays the role of the terrifying wilderness by saying the ice was all around, it cracked and growled and roared and howled. It terrifies the sailors with its noises. At length did cross an albatross, thorough the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul, we hailed it in God's name. Just as a mariner explained that there wasn't a single living thing in sight, this albatross emerges. But whether it's unnatural, and like we connotate this unnatural being as something scary, as something terrifying, actually with it coming, the ice did split with the thunder fits, and also a good south wind sprung up behind. So whether it's supposed to be unnatural, it's also a good omen. They still welcome it because it brought about this change. But suddenly, amidst all this like joy at being free from the ice, the wedding guest interjects, because we forget that he's there, but he's actually the one who the mariner tells the story to. He says, God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why look'st thou so? And the mariner replies, with my crossbow I shot the albatross. With this starts the mariner's journey for his repentance of the sin that he has committed. Everyone pays for his crime. We also have a lot of religious imagery, well, considering the time, of course, by saying he shot him specifically with his crossbow. The crossbow is reminiscent of Jesus, and the mariner plays the role of Judas, the betrayer. So by betraying one of God's creatures, he actually betrays like all of humanity. He's betraying God, I would say, as well. Ah, wretch, said they, the bird to slay, that made the breeze to blow. His shipmates are against killing the bird, but then the sun comes up and like the wind starts blowing, and they forget all about it, and they decide that he killed the bird that bring the fog and mist. By justifying his crime and saying that he was right to do what he did, they involve themselves with it. Even though they're not the one that shot the albatross, they're sailing calmly, there's a soft breeze, the sun is up above them, and then the wind drops. And where before it was the glorious sun, now it's the bloody sun at noon. So here I think it's two meanings. Well, first of all, bloody being like a curse word. It's what's imposing their punishment onto them. But at the same time, I also think it's a reminder of the sin that they have committed, because of course, bloody red, the blood is on their hands. and they're stuck on the sea because the wind is no longer blowing. So like the sun is the eye of God watching them, and it's heating them, and the boards are shriveling. Water, water everywhere, and all the boards did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. And so the albatross begins to be avenged. They killed him when they were in the land of ice, when there was so much ice they couldn't sail, but they could melt the ice and they could drink it. Now that they're actually out there exploring the world, when they were just like beginning to congratulate themselves on being heroes, this is when the sun came out and the punishment started. About, in reel and rout, the death fires danced at night. The water, like a witch's spoils, burned green and blue and white. Although these are slimy things on the slimy sea, there's this certain beauty to it, the romantic idea of the sublime. So archaic definition by Google is elevate to a high degree of moral or spiritual purity or excellence. While repenting their sins, although it's a punishment to have these ugly creatures, it's already starting to be described as something beautiful. And I think although it's of course meant to be a punishment, it's also a little bit of a gift that their eyes are opening up to nature and the world around them. Part 2 ends with the ship crew's tongue through utter drought was withered at the root. We could not speak. So they had congratulated him before, the mariner, with those tongues, and I think it's quite a Dantesque punishment that it fits according to the sin that they have committed. Then they also hang the albatross around the mariner's neck, so just imagine what it's like carrying this burden on you, not just metaphorically but physically now as well. As they're standing there after days of drought, their throats parched, their throats blackened, they cannot speak. Then the mariner sees the ship, so he bites his arm and sucks the blood, and he cries, "A sail, a sail." And they have this moment of joy, thinking that this is it, their punishment is over, that heaven has sent them grace. Is that woman all her crew? Is that a death? And are there two? Is death that woman's mate? Her lips are red, her hair is blonde, she's described as pretty. She is life and death. And so what happens is life and death play dice for the lives of the crew, and life and death wins. Suddenly the moon comes up and all 200 men on the ship's crew, they drop dead. They all look the mariner into his eye, and then they sail to the sky, their souls going up. The sound that they make is the sound of the crossbow. So because they look into his eye, as we've talked about it being like the soul, it's also a reminder that it's because of him that they're carrying out this punishment, and they're ensuring that by, adding to his curse, that he won't forget them, that he won't forget the error that he has committed, that he has to repent for it. Then the wedding guest interrupts and he says that he's scared because maybe the mariner is the spirit since all the men dropped dead, but the wedding guest assures him and he says like, no, I am alive. Actually, my punishment was that I had to be there all alone while all the men were dead, and their death was on my behalf. And he starts to compare himself with the slimy things that sail on the sea. He tries to pray, but he can't. A wicked whisper came and made my heart as dry as dust. It's a reminder that he's not worthy of God listening to him. Also, a little bit of a side note, he cannot sleep, he cannot drink, he cannot do anything for 7 days and 7 nights. There are 7 parts. 7 is a hugely important number. It has huge significance in the Bible. It's mentioned 735 times by the Bible. It took 7 days to create our world, and also it's perfection and unity between all of God's creatures, and it shows God's authority, God looking down on the world that he has created. It's not just Christianity, it's Judaism and Hinduism and also Islam, and I think it's just for spiritual people in general, 7 is an important number. There is a scene in part 4 when the mariner looks up at the moon. Oh, it's so beautiful. I would like to join the moon. I would like to go exploring. I would like to be with the stars and leave this ship. And then by the light of the moon, he looks down on the slimy things that are swimming around him, and his heart fills with love, much like the Grinch. He blesses them while being unaware of it, and the spirits recognize him, and because of his blessing, everything around him changes, and the albatross falls from his neck. It's a sign that he's letting go of his burden, that his sin is being absolved by God per se, and he can finally sleep and he can finally drink. And then all the dead men suddenly wake up. There's wind, but it doesn't fill the sails. The ship sails on its own accord, court with the dead man operating the boats. Because the sails are filling by themselves, an allusion to his love being all-encompassing. And then at dawn, all the dead men, they drop dead, they crowd around the masts, and then they let go. And this time when they let go, he can hear the birds sing, so he can hear the nature returning back to him. He hears two voices speak. They're just called Voice 1 and Voice 2. They discuss his fate and talk about how the mariner is in this trance and it's this angelic force that's driving the ship forward. When he wakes up, he realizes that the spell has been lifted and now the wind is blowing all around him and he can actually feel it, and it's sort of a welcome back. And on the dead men, there are angels that are representing life. There are seraphs guiding him back to land, leading him and welcoming him back. So there's this hermit that lives in the woods, and then he sees him sailing towards him in his boat, and the hermit is filled with wonder at this ship that has all these dead men. But then suddenly the ship splits in two and it sinks like lead into the sea. And I think it's interesting to note that when the albatross fell from his neck, it was also described as lead falling. Eventually the ship falls and cracks and everything sinks. He's saved by the hermit, and that's where we return back to the story with him and the wedding guest. And is of sense forlorn, a sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn. So much like the reader, the wedding guest plays the role of the listener. The wedding guest, he represents us and our focus on the everyday life. And by turning away, he's turning away from the distractions that have led him before. There are some speculations, of course, on what's going to happen to the wedding guest. Is he the one that's continuing to spread the story? But actually, I think because it's called the Rime of the Ancient Mariner and the mariner is described as ancient, that he could be several centuries old. I have strange power of speech, that moment that his face I see, I know the man that must hear me, to him my tale I teach. So perhaps the wedding guest, instead of going around and passing on the messages of the mariner, perhaps the wedding guest is actually just coming to a deeper connection with himself, and perhaps he's being prevented, much like us, from focusing on the things that don't matter, like the everyday, and focusing on the sublime, like nature. I love the way that the words flow, truly a pleasure to read. I also think it's just such a great way to familiarize yourself with the Romantic period through this poem. There's so much to discuss, there's so much to learn. And so Coleridge leaves us with this idea that opening our hearts is the way forward. Thanks so much for watching this far. Britannica and New World Encyclopedia, and of course the text. Most of all, the text. I did use some articles on JSTOR, but it was the Oxford World Classics edition of collected Samuel Taylor Coleridge that helped me the most. I hope you enjoyed the video. There are some links in the description box. Just a reminder, please like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.